Hello, my name is Aisa Torres, and today I will be presenting on the social issue of minimum wage. So, what is minimum wage? The minimum wage is a government set standard that establishes the lowest amount an employer is legally allowed to pay a worker for their labor. According to procon.org, the minimum wage is determined through government regulation or in some cases, collective bargaining agreements. It can be defined by different measures such as hourly, weekly, or monthly pay, and it applies to specific categories of workers depending on the law. The social issue surrounding the minimum wage centers on whether this wage level should be raised, lowered, or adjusted to better reflect the current cost of living and economic conditions. Supporters argue that the minimum wage is meant to protect workers from exploitation and ensure they can meet basic needs, while critics argue that setting wages by law interferes with the free market and can have unintended economic consequences. As a result, the minimum wage remains a highly debated issue because it affects millions of workers, businesses, and the overall economy, while also raising broader questions about fairness, poverty, inequality, and the role of government in the regulating labor market. So, the history and evolution of minimum wage. The history of the minimum wage in the United States reflects a long struggle to balance fair wages with legal and economic realities. In the late 19th century, most workers earned well below the poverty line, which motivated the progressive movement to push for laws that would improve wages and working conditions. Early state laws, starting with Massachusetts in 1912 and Oregon in 1913, focused on protecting women and minors who were especially vulnerable to low pay and unsafe workplaces. The constitutionality of this law was challenged in several keys, like the Supreme Court cases and the Settler versus O'Hara in 1917. The court upheld Oregon's law in a 4-4 split, signaling early judicial support. However, in Atkins versus Children's Hospital in 1923, the court struck down DC's minimum wage law, arguing that it interfered with the liberty of contract. It wasn't until West Coast Hotel versus Parrish in 1937 that the court reversed this stance, recognizing that legislature had the authority to set minimum wage to protect workers' health and welfare. The first federal minimum wage was introduced in the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, although the Supreme Court later struck it down. Later legislation, like the Public Contract Act in 1936 and the Fair Labor Standard Act in 1938, established nationwide protections, including minimum wages, maximum hours, and limits on child labor, provisions that were upheld by the Supreme Court in Perkins versus Logan Steel Co. and United States versus Darby. Today, most states and territories have their own minimum wage laws, and many cities set even higher rates to account for cost of living differences. Federal proposals continue to push the wage higher, ranging from $10.10 to $17.75 for federal contractors, reflecting ongoing debates over the role of minimum wage in addressing inequality and supporting workers. So, sociological imagination. Using sociological imagination helps connect personal struggles to broader social forces. The issue of minimum wage does not only affect society as a whole, but also deeply impacts individuals and families. Many people are forced to work long hours or hold two or even three jobs just to afford basic necessities for themselves and their children. This constant pressure can lead to physical exhaustion and significant mental stress, affecting the overall health and well being. At the individual level, we can see that working multiple jobs often leaves little time for rest or your family or even personal care. Parents, for example, may struggle to balance work and family responsibilities. Wage levels directly influence how much time parents are able to spend with their children, and financial stress can reduce patience and emotional availability, ultimately lowering the quality of parenting. And at a social level, these individual experiences reflect broader structural problems such as wage inequality and the rising cost of living. When large numbers of people are overworked and stressed, society sees wider effects, including poorer health outcomes, strained family relationships, and increased demand for social support. This shows how what may seem like a personal issue actually connects to larger economic and social structure. So, going into the pros and cons. The first pro here at the site was raising the minimum wage helps workers to afford basic living expenses and reducing income, gender, and racial inequalities. So, when we look at the current federal minimum wage, it becomes clear that it's not enough for workers to meet basic living expenses, especially housing. Research shows that full-time workers need significantly more than $7.25 an hour just to afford like modest one to two bedroom apartments. Because of this gap, many families who work full-time still struggle to pay for essentials like food and childcare. The issue affects Black and Hispanic families disproportionately, as well as women and people of color, who make up a large share of the minimum wage workers. Most of these workers are not teenagers earning extra money, but adults over the age of 25 who are often the primary earners in their households. Law wages make it difficult for families to save, access healthcare, or invest in education and job training, which keeps them stuck in low paying jobs. So, and raising the minimum wage would help alleviate these struggles and reduce income, gender, and racial inequalities. Research also shows that increasing the minimum wage has a ripple effect, raising wages for millions of workers who earn slightly above the minimum wage, not those at the bottom. Pro number two, so raising the minimum wage to match inflation and productivity benefits the economy, spurring consumer activity, job growth, and lower federal deficit. So over the time, the minimum wage has lost much of its value because it has not been adjusted for inflation. The 725 that we see today has less purchasing power than the minimum wage like had decades ago. Many economists argue that if wage had kept pace with inflation and worker productivity, the minimum wage would be much higher than it is now. Increasing and indexing the minimum wage to inflation would help ensure that workers' earnings reflect the modern economy. Higher wages also make jobs more attractive, which can reduce employee turnover and absenteeism. When workers stay longer and are more reliable, productivity improves. Additionally, when workers earn more, they tend to spend more, which stimulates consumer demand and boosts economic activity. Studies show that the raising minimum wage would inject billions of dollars into the economy and create new jobs. Increased wages also lead to higher tax revenues and less reliance on public assistance programs, which can help reduce the federal budget deficit. Pro number three. Raising the minimum wage has social benefits, including reducing poverty and crime and improving school attendance and family health. So, beyond the economic benefits, raising the minimum wage can also help important social impacts. It has important social impacts. Studies show that increasing the minimum wage could lift millions of people out of poverty and significantly reduce reliance on government assistance programs. When families earn money, they are better able to meet their basic needs without the government support. So, higher wages also benefit children and teens. Families with higher income experience less poverty, which improves school attendance and lowers dropout rates. Teens can work fewer hours while still earning enough money, allowing them to focus more on school. Research suggests that even modest increases in the minimum wage can significantly reduce the likelihood of students dropping out. Health outcomes also improve when wages rise. Workers are most likely to afford nutritious food, exercise, and healthcare, leading to better physical and mental health and even preventing premature deaths. Additionally, higher wages are associated with lower crime rates as stable employment provides alternatives to illegal activity. And now we move on to the cons. So the first con is raising the minimum wage increases housing and consumer goods costs for everyone and greatly disadvantages minimum wage workers. So one major concern when raising the minimum wage is that higher wages can lead to increased costs for housing and everyday goods. Studies show that after minimum wage increases, rents often rise as landlords respond to tenants' increased ability to pay. This reduces the financial benefit workers receive from higher wages. Also, small businesses, which employ many minimum wage workers, often operate on thin profit margins. So, to afford higher wages, the money may raise prices, passing the to consume. So, as a result, workers may see their higher wages offset by higher living costs. Additionally, some workers may lose government benefits or pay more in taxes after a wage increase, leaving them financially worse off overall. Employers may also expect higher skill levels in exchange for higher pay, which can reduce the availability of entry-level jobs that provide important experience and opportunities for upward mobility. Con 2, another argument raising the minimum wage is that it increases operating costs for business. When labor becomes more expensive, employers may respond by cutting hours, laying off workers, or hiring fewer employees. Research suggests that while some businesses may hire more workers, each worker may receive fewer hours, leading to lower overall earnings. Reduced hours can also result in unpredictable schedules, so it makes it harder for workers to qualify for benefits like healthcare or requirement plans. And even in some cases, businesses that cannot absorb the higher costs may be forced to close altogether, so leading to job losses. So to avoid raising labor costs, some companies turn to automation or outsource jobs to countries where wages are lower. Studies show that many businesses would consider increasing automation or outsourcing if the minimum wage were raised, which could reduce the number of available jobs in the USA. And lastly, con 3, raising the minimum wage exacerbates income disparities and the cycle of poverty. So, a key criticism of a large federal minimum wage increases is that it does not account for differences in the cost of living across the country. What may be manageable for businesses in high-cost cities can be much more difficult for employers in a rural or low-cost area. As a result, like small businesses in these areas may struggle the most. Research also suggests that while hourly wages may increase, workers may lose hours or jobs, which can reduce their total income. And some studies indicate that minimum wage increases can actually increase the number of families who are poor or near poor due to reduced employment opportunities and higher prices. There are also concerns about unintended social consequences. Higher wages may encourage some students from low-income families to leave school early to earn money, limiting their long-term career prospects. Reduced employment opportunities among young people have also been linked to higher crime rates. So what is my stance on the issue? What do I think is that I do support the minimum wage. I believe that minimum wage should be increased, and the reason why I chose this topic is because I have personally seen how difficult it is for people to survive on the current minimum wage. I have had direct conversations with individuals and families where both partners are working full time and like they can still barely they're barely able to afford basic necessities in today's economy. So that's why I chose this topic because at a personal level I know how it is to struggle and to see people struggling with it. And the way this issue also affects like students and their access to education. Many students feel pressure to work immediately after high school instead of continuing their education because their parents cannot afford basic expenses and others are forced to take on large student loans while working long hours. So this places them in debt before they even begin their careers. And a reason why we should care for this issue as a whole is because it affects a large portion of the population, not just minimum wage workers. Like low wages contribute to financial stress, limited opportunities, and then even long-term inequality. So addressing the minimum wage has the potential to improve quality of life. You can strengthen families and create a more stable and fair society. And these are the reasons why I believe change in this issue, social issue, is necessary. Thank you very much for your time, and this was my presentation.